Hello everybody, this is Stephen Pugh of the Home Bible College. We're in year 2 of the Home Bible College and this is week 14, lecture 11. And we're looking at 3 Bible books today: Ezra, Nehemiah and Esther. So we'll get straight on into them. Now Ezra is quite a small book, written by this prophet in about 450 BC, and Ezra writes to encourage the people of God to trust in him. They have lots of enemies and they're going to try and stop them if they can, but he says if you trust in God, then God will be faithful. And so I've called the book, if I had to give it a title, I've called it God is Faithful. The theme of this book is that God has kept his promise to deliver the children of Israel from Babylon and to restore them to their own land. The book of Ezra follows 2 Chronicles as the history of the children of Israel returning from their captivity. And the children of Israel return in 2 stages. First of all, Zerubbabel brings back the children of Israel home to their native land. He brings back about 50,000 people. This is after the Edict of Cyrus, who says that they're allowed after their long captivity to return home. So he brings back about 50,000 people. And Ezra also returns at a later stage with about 2,000 people. So they return home and worship is restored and the temple is being built, but there's opposition to the work. Eventually the temple is finished and Cyrus's edict is rediscovered and the temple is finally dedicated. So all of these events take place after the Babylonian captivity. They're what we would call the post-exile books. The second part, which begins in chapter 7 of the book of Ezra, describes Ezra's return. When Ezra arrives, he finds the people and he takes over their political and religious leadership in the nation. One of the things that Ezra discovers, which is rather strange and odd, is that when they come back to the land of Israel, what they discover is that they have all got mixed marriages. All the men married foreign wives, and this of course is not going to be good for Israel in the long run, because the Jewish heritage is always maintained through the women. So it's important for the women to be true Jews, for the children to be true Jews. So under the instructions of the Lord, the whole nation divorce their wives, their foreign wives, all on the same day, and they take young Jewish girls to wife. And this restores the heritage of the Lord's people. It's one thing to be back in the land, but it's quite another thing to be back in a right relationship with their God. So this is really the story of the book of Ezra, a fascinating book, and it's one of the post-exile books. Now the next book that we come to is the book of Nehemiah. Nehemiah's book could be described as the sword and the trowel. That would be my title for the book, because they were faced with enemies and they were faced with a vast building program. This is a slightly bigger book to Ezra. It has 13 chapters, written by Nehemiah between 445 to 432 BC. Nehemiah wrote to record the last historical book of the Old Testament. And the book records the rebuilding of the walls of Jerusalem and also the revival of faith in God's people. Zerubbabel had led the first return from Babylon, we mentioned a moment ago, in 538 BC. Ezra had led the second return from Babylon in 458 BC. And Nehemiah leads the third return in 445 BC. So Ezra and Nehemiah are one book in the Hebrew Bible. That's something to just bear in mind. Chronologically then, Nehemiah is the last book of the Old Testament. The key word is so, and therefore it describes a very packed book full of transforming actions and deeds. The key verse could possibly be in another book, strangely enough. In the book of Daniel chapter 9 verse 25, Daniel says, "Know ye therefore and understand that from the going forth of the commandment to restore and to build Jerusalem unto Messiah the Prince shall be 7 weeks and 62 weeks. The street will be built again, and a wall, even in troublous times." And it is Nehemiah that has the responsibility to build the walls of the city. So the book then is divided into two parts. We have the rebuilding of the walls of Jerusalem, and then we have revival in the heart of the nation. And these two themes are really the backbone of the book. Now, the first part, the rebuilding of the walls, is all about the physical restoration of a secure city. We read first of all in the first chapter how that Nehemiah is praying for Jerusalem. In chapter 2 we see that he then goes to Jerusalem. In chapter 3 is the rebuilding of the wall. And the workers have to guard the construction. We see the abolition of usury, and we see lots of plots against Nehemiah. And Nehemiah appoints rulers to bring order into the political and the physical city that he's rebuilding. And we have a list then in chapter 7 of all those heads of families that returned. Now the second part of the book is the book that will fill the heart of every evangelist. You see, it's one thing to have the walls. I mean, I'm in a church here. I'm in a church building. The Home Bible College is very grateful to use this building. And these walls will be built by future generations that we've never met. And we're grateful for the walls, but it's what goes on within the walls that really counts. And that's what the second part of the book is all about, starting in chapter 8. Ezra reads the law to the people, and then they celebrate the Feast of Tabernacles. And at that particular time, the people confess their sins, and the people make a reinstatement of the covenant that they have with their God. And the people then take tithes of the people so that they might live in the city. The priests and the Levites receive those tithes and are able then to reinstate temple worship. Nehemiah rededicates the walls of the city and reinstitutes the worship of the Lord in the temple. And then Nehemiah finally makes charges to the people to keep to the word of the Lord and to promise to serve the Lord faithfully. So the first part then is all about the building of the structure. The second part is all about the spiritual reformation of Israel within the structure. Now, Israel are not becoming Christians here. There's no Christians. This is Old Testament. And he's dealing with a nation that's under a covenant. They're all under a covenant. Both the good and the bad. They're all under the covenant of Moses. They're all circumcised. And they all have a duty. And they have the honour of worshipping the Lord faithfully. And that's what Nehemiah does. He leads a spiritual revival. He brings the people back to the Lord their God. So that's Ezra and Nehemiah. Now the next book that we're going to look at briefly before we get to the end of this lecture is the little book of Esther. Compared to the other books, it's just very slightly smaller, but not by much. It has 9 chapters. And Esther, it's a book that was written probably between 483 and 471 BC. Esther and her friends are captive in this hostile land. You see, when the children of Israel came back from Babylon, 50,000 in the beginning, and then 2,000 later, and then a few thousand after that. This wasn't many of them. Many of the children of Israel voted to stay, and they stayed in the land of Babylon. And this is the story of how the Jews in the whole world were saved by the actions of a young, beautiful Jewish girl. So they're held by a king that is a complete despot. He is a complete autocrat. There's also an evil man called Haman that's out to kill her and all her people. So how will God help her? Well, her story is found in this little book, the book of Esther. God moves various people into positions in the land, and then he then uses those people in their positions to make the transformation and to make the saving of the children of Israel. A key verse is chapter 4, verse 14. For if thou altogether holdest thy peace at this time, then shall their enlargement and deliverance arise to the Jews from another place. But thou and thy father's house shall be destroyed, and who knoweth whether thou art come to the kingdom for such a time as this. Beautiful expression. So we have then, we don't know who the author is. The name of God is not specifically mentioned in the book, except that it's hidden. It's hidden 5 times in the form of acrostics. So this is a strange book, and it's all about the children of Israel who are away from the Lord, settled in a foreign land. The book divides into sort of 4 main themes. First of all, we have Esther becomes queen to Xerxes. Now, for Esther to become queen, a number of things have to take place. First of all, Vashti, who is the queen of Ahasuerus, she says to the king, I will not come and parade myself in front of all your nobles. And so the king doesn't know what to do about that. He decides that the best thing he can do is to depose her and divorce her. He doesn't kill her, but he divorces her, and he makes this competition to become the next queen. And this great competition goes out, and Esther is put forward as one of the candidates to become the wife of the king. Ahasuerus eventually chooses Esther, and she is a Jew, but she's advised to keep her Jewish heritage private for now, and eventually her Jewish heritage will be revealed. And also at this time, her uncle, a man called Mordecai, he saves Ahasuerus' life because he hears of a plot, and he reveals the plot to the king, and the king manages to get all these men executed. But then everybody forgets about what Mordecai has done. So the Lord then moves all the characters into place. It's like a massive game of chess. Haman makes his bid to plot against the Jews. Mordecai, he asks Esther to help the Jews. And Esther has to do something which could mean her own life. It could mean her own execution. She has to go and speak to Ahasuerus, her husband. So she goes and she stands in the court. And for a moment in time, we wonder whether she'll lose her life. But all of a sudden, Ahasuerus extends his scepter towards Esther and invites her into court. And he says, what is it that you'd like me to do for you? And she explains. She says, well, my people are all going to be murdered. And Ahasuerus is astounded by that. And he gives an order. The order is that the Jews are able to defend themselves against this plot. And the Jews do defend themselves, and the battle then is won. The Jews become victorious, and Haman the one who invented a gallows, which basically was a crucifixion stake in which he was going to crucify the Jews, he finds that he's executed on his own cross. So the battle is won. The Jews are victorious throughout the whole world because it was a world empire. And the Jews institute a new feast, the Feast of Purim, and Mordecai is exalted to a high position in the land. And the Feast of Purim then was a celebration every year that's carried on right down the years. In fact, it continues right on today with the Jews. And at the Feast of Purim, this book, the Book of Esther, is read. And there's lots of traditions, but one of the traditions, which I think is lovely, is that whenever the name of Haman is mentioned, they all boo. Whenever the name of Esther is mentioned, they all cheer. And I think that's a lovely thing to learn about this wonderful book. So there we are. We have 3 books, Ezra, Nehemiah and Esther. And Esther speaks of the children of Israel in a foreign land. They're not held captive there, but they don't really want to come back to Israel, but they're threatened by Haman and his evil plan. But God has already put his person in charge. He's already put Esther right next to the throne, and Esther is going to put her own life on the line by asking King Ahasuerus for permission for the Jews to defend themselves against Haman. There's a little twist here. Haman descended from one of the people that Saul, the king Saul, should have executed. So there you are, you see. When something is not done that should be done, there's always repercussions down the line. And Mordecai, well, he descends also, but he descends from one of the people that David in his graciousness blessed. And Mordecai is the fruit of the blessing that David gives. So there we are, you see. Not only is Haman the fruit of something that was never done properly, Mordecai is the fruit of someone that really blessed Israel. And so we have 2 characters there. They meet each other in this foreign kingdom, but they have Esther, the young girl, beautiful, beautiful girl, who gets along to the throne, and there she uses her position to save her people from Haman's plot. Great story. Lovely read. I'm sure you'll enjoy reading it. There we are. That's lecture 11, which is Ezra, Nehemiah and Esther. Look forward to talking to you again on the next occasion. God bless you all. Bye for now.